Well, if you just joined us very quickly, that was one of our KC-135s from the Air National Guard out of Salt Lake doing one of their touch and goes that they like to frequent Wendover for. So if you missed that, once the video's over, certainly go back and catch that out for a good view.
Or in fact, he's probably going to make another pass, so when he does that, we'll interrupt this broadcast for about 30 seconds and we'll show you that next pass.
That's right.
Because it looks to me like he's coming around.
I think we can start.
My museum curator is giving me the high sign that we're ready to start our broadcast. And we had a little bit of a change in plans, probably due to my fault, but we're broadcasting today from out at the atomic bomb loading pit. And rather than being in the hangar next week, we'll stop by the hangar and talk about that. So what I wanted to talk about today was Wendover and its relation to the Manhattan Project. Of course, for the bulk of the time, Wendover was involved with conventional bombers, B-17s, B-24s, the bulk of which ended up going to Europe. So the Manhattan Project came a little bit later. There was we have a memo, August 29th, 1944, from a Captain Deary to General Leslie Groves. And I suspect most of you know, but General Leslie Groves had been chosen to lead the entire Manhattan Project. So it was getting time to work with the Army Air Force, and this memo to General Groves noted the following things. Number one, the Army Air Force was making a lot of progress in moving forward. General Ent, who was commander of the 2nd Air Force, was being briefed, and there's a Colonel Wilson that was responsible for putting the plans together in the Army Air Force, and he had been working on that. He advised that the 393rd Squadron out of Fairmont, Nebraska had been chosen as the delivery squadron for the bomb. They also noted that Wendover Airfield had been selected, and then interestingly enough, in the memo it says a Colonel Montgomery was chosen to lead the 509th Composite Group. The next piece in the memo says that Muroc Air Force Base, which is now Edwards, had been abandoned for testing and that it would all be moved to Wendover. At the bottom of the memo, there's a little handwritten note that says that they've decided not to tell General Montgomery. He hadn't been notified, and they decided to choose Colonel Paul Tibbets to lead the project at Wendover. So that's how the decision was made, and then of course Colonel Tibbets came out and to Wendover and started to assemble the 509th Composite Group. The 509th was called a composite group because they wanted everything to be self-contained within the group. There was the 603rd Engineering Group. It's the 1395th Military Police Group, 1027th Air Material Command, of course the 393rd that flew the aircraft, and the 320th Troops Carrier Squadron. There was also a special group formed called the 1st Ordnance Group. And here's the plane. You want to watch that? All right, there's your flight for the day. So the 509th Composite Group consisted of about 1,770 men. There were also an additional 50 that were called in from Los Alamos and other locations, but that's how it was done. One interesting story: the Navy officer that was very responsible in the Project Alberta, the whole scheme of things, was Frederick Ashworth. Frederick Ashworth had been to Wendover as a child when he was about 10 years old. And when Norman Ramsey notified him that he was to move to Wendover and be the interface between Los Alamos engineers and Wendover, he said, I've been to Wendover. He said, there's no way I'm taking my family and living in Wendover. So Norman Ramsey respected that, and for the next, this was in December when they notified Fred Ashworth. And for the next 5 months, Fred Ashworth spent his time flying almost weekly between Los Alamos and Wendover. He'd bring the engineers, they'd bring new designs, new changes, and they would then work on the prototype. So that brings us up. What was the role of Wendover in this whole project? Wendover was referred to as Site K. They also referred to Wendover as Kingman, and it was a sub-project of Alberta, which was to turn the engineering design into a deliverable weapon. So Wendover had a couple of roles. The first role was to determine the ballistics of the bomb. So early on there was a test program in Wendover to build bombs that were, and I shouldn't be calling them bombs because back then they were referred to as the gadget or the gimmick, or they called them units. So they'd fill one of these gadgets that was the same shape, they'd fill it with concrete, paint it black and white, go out to the bombing range and photograph this bomb as it fell to see how the ballistics of it were doing. And of course, the early bombs were not good at all. They wobbled as they came down. They didn't have a consistent drop path. So the tail fins were modified. They went through several modifications of the shape on the Fat Man bomb before finally arriving at the final configuration. So that was number one. Number two was to test the fusing and detonation mechanism within the bombs. Each bomb was really quite complex. I skipped an early photo. In fact, let me back up just a sec and have Landon show you this. Here's a layout of the base. This is actually late 1943. The B-17 is flying over the field. But most of the base, all the personnel, everybody's up here. The south part of the base is where we had munitions bunkers and originally a gunnery range. When the Manhattan Project arrived, there were 3 bomb pits configured in that location. And down here was referred to as the South Base Technical Area. This is the area where they assembled all of these prototype atomic weapons. Further out, we just looked at that assembly area. Further out, there were 2 sites that were Fat Man high explosive sites. The Fat Man functioned by having about 6,000 pounds of high explosive, and when they assembled those with the live explosive, they didn't want to do it close to the other personnel. So there are 2 buildings out here with copper-lined floors to prevent static electricity, and that's where those bombs were assembled. Interestingly to note, too, over in this site is a launch site for what we referred to as the JB-2, the Jet Bomb 2. It was a copy of the German V-1 buzz bomb, and those planes were brought out to Wendover. Another brief pause there. They were brought out to Wendover and launched roughly the same time that the atomic work was going on. And while this was necessary work, it's also thought that it may have been a diversion to try to distract from what was going on with the atomic bombs. So just to give you an idea of the complexity of these bombs, here's a picture of half of the inside of a little boy atomic bomb. There's a clock mechanism up here. It had 8 spring-wound clocks in it. Here's a radar unit. Here's another radar unit. We can't see the barometric sensors, which are back in the tail of the plane. But each bomb had 6 barometric sensor systems, 4 radars, the clock mechanisms, and of course the connections to the test equipment and electrical safeties. The Fat Man bomb, there's a picture of all the wiring and everything that goes on inside the Fat Man. The 4 radars and the clocks are all contained under this cover in the front. But as you can see, assembling one of these bombs, which weighed 5 tons and had all these wires and everything had to be done perfectly, was really quite a significant effort. So the second portion of making or the function of Wendover rather was to make sure that all of that worked properly. The bomb or the gadget was designed to explode at 1,800 feet. When it pulled out of the plane, the 4 wires pulled out, and Landon may have talked about this. Okay, he didn't. But all those wires pulled out and started all these clocks. The clocks ticked down a little bit and let the bomb get further away from the plane. They turned on the barometric sensor systems, and when any 3 of those sensor systems said we've reached a predetermined altitude, about 7,000 feet, that turned on the radar altimeters, and then one radar altimeter, any one of the 4 could say I've reached 1,800 feet. When the second one confirmed that, that's what detonated the bomb. So any 3 of the barometric sensors could go out, any 2 of the radar altimeters could go out, and the bomb would still function. Everything was backed up. Well, this whole mechanism was really complicated, and all these test drops that they made at Wendover, a lot of them were simply to try to confirm that all of that was working. And then a third function at Wendover, of course, was to develop the accuracy. We'd typically been bombing from 17 to 20,000 feet. These bombs were dropped from 30,000 plus feet. In fact, in the testing, they tested as high as 35,000 feet, which is a long way for a bomb to fall and try to hit the target accurately. So that was part of what went on at Wendover. One of the things that I wanted to bring out about these bombs is, and it's wrong in virtually all the literature. It's wrong in the Atomic Heritage Foundation, in the book The Making of the Atomic Bomb. Almost everybody makes this mistake, and that is they say that Wendover was where they dropped pumpkins. So here's a picture of a pumpkin. A pumpkin is a bomb that has the same shape as a Fat Man. It's got 3 contact fuses, and it weighs about the same, and it was just used for practice bombing. It explodes when it hits the ground. What was tested in Wendover were the real units, the real gadgets, and they can be distinguished by these 4 contact fuses. Now the 4 contact fuses, pardon me, didn't have any function in the normal function of the bomb. They were there that in case everything failed, and the bomb hit the ground, these would cause the bomb to explode in a non-nuclear fashion, so that the bomb would be destroyed and they couldn't and somebody couldn't look at the design or easily look at what had happened. So much of the literature refers to the fact that Wendover was just dropping pumpkins, and they were not just. There were a couple of pumpkins dropped by the 509th Group, but virtually everything were prototype weapons designed to test all these various functions. And just a quick note about the aircraft. The aircraft were referred to as Silverplate, and that Silverplate was not only the name of the aircraft, but that was Paul Tibbitt's code word for the project if he really needed to get something. If you needed some material or some personnel or an aircraft, you used the word Silverplate. Tibbetts would use that, and that was the highest priority within the Army Air Force, and they could get anything they wanted in a very short order. So anyway, there was a first set of Silverplate planes, B-29s, that were in Wendover that the 509th Group used, and also that the 216th Base Unit used. The 216th Base Unit was a special unit that was assembling all of these prototype atomic weapons. Prior to them doing that, the 216th Base Unit was just the caretaker unit of the base. They took care of all the physical functions on the base. When the Manhattan Project came, there was a new group called the 216th Base Unit Special, and the Special Group had a couple of parts. There was the SOD, the Special Ordnance Division, and then there was another division that actually flew the prototypes, and that was they once the bombs were loaded, the planes were taken to the ramp, and then those planes were flown. Well, again, back referring to these Silverplate, the 509th and the 216th trained with the early B-29s, which had been modified by taking out the gun turrets, all except the rear gun turret. And then a second set of planes was being built for them. The second set had electric reversing props, fuel injection, and pneumatic bomb bay doors, and had a weaponeer station for the individual, the weaponeer that was monitoring the status of the gadget, of the atomic bomb. And so those planes were delivered to Wendover starting in April, May. The last couple were delivered in June, and then the 509th Group actually flew all of the planes and the equipment. They went to Tinian Island in June. Well, one interesting story, once they got these new planes with the electric reversing props, Frederick Ashworth says he was on a flight with Chuck Sweeney as the pilot, who wanted to test out the new electric reversing props. And he said he reversed them with the plane about 10 feet off the ground. And he said, that is not the thing to do with electric reversing props. He said, we determined that plane was very tough as it slammed into the ground. So, but those planes were a much better plane with the fuel injection. They didn't quite have the problems with the carburation that the earlier B-29s did. So those planes went a little better. One another thought. Let's see. Well, actually, let's now that we're here, let's take a look at the bomb pit and move over, and we'll talk about this bomb pit. In the photograph, you saw that there were 3 bomb pits on Wendover. We're actually told by the veterans that there was a 4th bomb pit in the ramp, and we've done some ground radar searches, and we've not been able to find the thick walls to that, but they say that one was there. So this is one of the bomb pits, The reason that we have these pits, number one, the Fat Man, for example, was too big to put on a bomb trailer and roll under the plane. So the only way to do that was to lower the bomb into a pit, back the plane over the pit, and then push the bomb up hydraulically into the pit. So you can see our hydraulic lift here. This is just like a regular service station lift, except we're missing that chrome-plated hydraulic ram. We actually do have a correct ram. We're just looking for donations to help us get this old one out and put the new one back in, if anybody's interested in car lifts. Anyway, so the bombs again would be, actually if Landon will point out to where they were built, out where those two long buildings are, and that control tower. The control tower is not original. That was built when they filmed the movie Con Air out here. But out in those two buildings, that's the area where all these prototype test units were assembled. And then they were put on a trailer, brought over to the bomb pit, and lowered into the bomb pit. Once they were down in the bomb pit, the crew, if we can look at one of these holes, there were 6 holes around the pit, and they'd slip a pole into that and then put about a 4-foot tarp and wrap it all around the bomb pit, so that if somebody was trying to photograph what was being loaded into the plane, that would keep prying eyes from seeing what was going on. And speaking of prying eyes, with regard to what was going on for security, as we said, the 509th Group was about 1,700 men. There were 400 FBI agents assigned to Wendover Air Base. They were cooks, they were mechanics, they were latrine orderlies, they were secretaries, and they were looking for any kind of violation as far as somebody talking too much. And we do know that there was one sergeant who went to Salt Lake, talked a little bit too much about what he was doing, came back, was invited into the office, and immediately dispatched to Alaska for the rest of the war. So they just didn't tolerate what was going on. And even interviewing some of the veterans, as we did, that worked out in those long buildings, those assembly buildings, even people who were 3 feet apart on a desk, you did not talk to that person on the right or the left about your function. You simply performed your design and test function, and then it all got put together later on. But the individuals did not talk about what they were doing. Just a quick note on test drops too, to give you an idea of the scale of it. The first test drop started in mid-February. By the end of the war, we have 80 test drops recorded of various gadgets. There were 50 of the Fat Man, there were 39 of the Little Boy. 34 of these test drops were at Wendover. 46 of them, they flew to the Salton Sea Range in California to simulate a longer flight, and most of those were water drops. They were dropped into the water to a water target. So the assembly work, the test work that went on at Wendover was just a very, very, really a high stress level. They were working extremely hard because the project didn't have a long time to get all of this accomplished. And the last drop of a Fat Man bomb to check that radar altimeter was made on August 5th. And of course, the Fat Man bomb was dropped on August 9th. So this was all just a very closely coupled project, and a very, very intense one. And of course, it all came together. So that's kind of the story of the history of Wendover and Wendover's role in the Manhattan Project. After the war, everybody left Wendover. Wendover had started with 103 people, went up to 20,000. When the 509th was here, there were probably only about 3,000 or 4,000 people on the base. But everybody went home, and there was no infrastructure left in Wendover, so there was no need to carry on the program here. All of the tooling, the fixtures, the aircraft, all of the various Fat Man components that had been shipped here, all of those were picked up and taken to Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico. And now that the atomic project was no longer a secret, that work carried on in Kirtland. So we appreciate you watching. We're going to do one more of these weekly broadcasts next week. We'll do that from the B-29 hangar, where we were going to be today. So hopefully you'll join us for that. And again, the museum is now open on Fridays and Saturdays. We've been notified that the casinos in Wendover are going to open up on June 4th and June 5th. So those of you that are coming out to the casino, go ahead and stop by the museum, and we'll see you there. Thanks again.